she was a glowing bride with a baby on the way, until 1 hour before the wedding she uncovered a betrayal so shocking it stopped everything. Emily stood before hundreds, not to say, "I do," but to speak a truth that left the entire crowd speechless. Her courage turned heartbreak into empowerment. Who would do this to a pregnant bride? And how did she turn pain into power? Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this. The sun rose gently over the rolling hills of Napa Valley, casting a warm, golden glow across the vineyard-lined estate where Emily Carter was about to marry the man she thought would be the love of her life. Her reflection stared back at her from the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, framed by soft vintage light bulbs and surrounded by the scent of peonies and rosewater. She looked radiant. The ivory silk gown hugged her pregnant belly just enough to show the miracle growing inside her, and her skin glowed in that way only expectant mothers seem to manage. Emily turned slightly to the side, adjusting the delicate lace sleeve on her shoulder. A tiny flutter in her belly made her smile. "You're excited too, aren't you?" she whispered, rubbing her stomach affectionately. The baby didn't kick, but she liked to believe he was listening. Grace Lynn, her best friend since college and now her maid of honor, stepped into the room holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a braided bun, and she looked both thrilled and slightly overwhelmed. "An hour till go time," Grace said, handing Emily a mug. "You ready?" Emily took the tea and nodded, then paused. "I should be. Everything's perfect. But—" Grace raised an eyebrow. "But? I feel— I don't know— weird." Emily looked back at the mirror, trying to put it into words. Not sick, not scared, just "You're about to get married," Grace said, walking over to fix the small crystal pin in Emily's hair. "Everyone gets cold feet, even the ones with warm hearts." Emily smiled at the wordplay, but her eyes lingered on her own reflection. "It's not cold feet, it's like— I don't know. Something's just off today." Grace stopped what she was doing and looked at her. "Is this about Jason? Did something happen?" No, he's been great. I mean, the past few weeks he's been busier than usual, work stuff. But he's still Jason. Sweet, thoughtful. He even had breakfast delivered here this morning. "See?" Grace said reassuringly. "He loves you. He's probably down there pacing around and sweating through his tux right now." Emily chuckled. "He does sweat a lot when he's nervous." Just then, a gentle knock sounded on the door. "Emily, it's Jason," came the familiar voice from the other side. "I'm not coming in, I know the rules, but I just wanted to check if you needed anything." Emily walked to the door, placing her hand gently on the wood. "I'm good," she said. "Just waiting for the part where I finally get to be your wife." "Me too," Jason replied, his voice soft. "Everything's ready. You're going to look stunning. Well, you always do, but today you'll be unreal." "See you soon," Emily whispered. She stepped away from the door and took a deep breath, trying to shake the lingering unease. Grace helped her sit down and gently pinned a vintage silver comb into her curls. It had belonged to Grace's grandmother and was Emily's something old. "Thanks," Emily said softly. "It's beautiful." "You said you liked antique stuff," Grace replied with a smile. "And your family now, so family heirloom time." There was a quiet knock, and Emily's mother, Natalie, entered the room wearing a mauve chiffon gown and pearls. Her eyes were already glistening. "My baby," she said, stepping forward with open arms. "You look like a dream." Emily hugged her tightly, catching a whiff of her jasmine perfume, the same scent she'd worn since Emily was a child. For a moment, everything felt grounded again. Warm, stable, real. "You ready, Mom?" Emily asked. "As long as you're happy," Natalie said, smoothing down her daughter's dress. "I'm more than ready." Emily's gown had a cathedral-length train, and Grace helped gather it as they stepped into the hallway. The chandelier above sparkled like falling stars, and through the tall windows they could see white chairs lined in rows, guests already filling them. The altar framed by roses and soft silk drapes. "Oh my God," Grace whispered. "This looks like a fairy tale." Emily nodded. "Let's just hope it ends like one." They descended the grand staircase toward the garden. The air smelled like lavender and sunshine. Guests turned to look, phones raised, some already crying. Emily felt their eyes on her, their admiration, their joy, but it didn't calm her the way it should have. "Emily," someone called. It was Tessa. Emily blinked in surprise as her old friend jogged over, arms open. Tessa was wearing a form-fitting red dress that shimmered in the light. Beautiful, but entirely inappropriate for a wedding guest, especially when the bride was wearing white. "You look amazing," Tessa said, pulling her into a soft hug. "Thanks," Emily replied, her voice distant. "Didn't know you were coming early." "Got in last night," Tessa said. "Wanted to surprise you. Couldn't miss my best friend's big day." Emily forced a smile, but her eyes briefly scanned the crowd beyond Tessa, searching for Jason. "Have you seen him?" she asked. Tessa shrugged. "Not yet. Probably busy bossing the planners around. You know how he gets." Grace narrowed her eyes slightly. "Didn't you say you weren't sure you could make it?" "Changed my mind," Tessa said breezily. "Wouldn't be right not to be here." Emily thanked her again, though the unease was now growing heavier in her chest. As the ceremony music began to play, the officiant signaled it was almost time. Grace whispered that she'd check if the aisle was clear. Natalie kissed her daughter's cheek, murmuring, "I'm proud of you, no matter what." Emily walked back into the suite for a moment of breath. She sat down, sipped water, adjusted her dress. The baby shifted again inside her. "You doing okay in there?" she asked softly. He kicked once in reply. Just then, Grace burst back in. "Hey," she said, trying to sound casual but failing. "Has Jason come up to see you again?" Emily frowned. "No." "Why?" "He was supposed to do a solo photo session with the photographer, but he didn't show up." "What?" Emily stood quickly, the bodice of her dress tightening with a sudden movement. "Where is he?" "That's the thing. No one knows. The planner thought he went to the lounge, but the lounge is empty." Emily felt the first sharp edge of panic. "Did you check his phone?" "I did," Grace said, holding up her own. "I texted him. It shows he's online, but no response." Emily reached for her own phone and typed a quick message. "Where are you? Everything okay?" She waited. The little read mark appeared, but nothing came back. A strange sensation pooled in her stomach. Not the baby. Something colder. A soft chime alerted her to a new text, but it wasn't from Jason. Unknown number. Don't trust the woman in red. Emily stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. "What is it?" Grace asked. Emily didn't respond. She simply turned, looked out the window, and just for a second she thought she saw a flash of red fabric disappear behind the garden hedges. "Grace," she whispered, "I think something's wrong." Grace moved closer, voice calm but alert. "Do you want me to go look?" Emily didn't answer immediately. Her hands shook as she reached for the nearest chair to steady herself. She looked down at her belly, her child, and then back at Grace. "No," she said. "I want to know. I need to know." And without waiting for an answer, she stepped out of the bridal suite, her dress trailing behind her like a cloud, walking into a storm she hadn't yet fully seen, but was about to. The garden buzzed with gentle laughter, clinking glasses, and the scent of blooming roses floating through the warm Napa air. The wedding guests had begun to take their seats, many pausing to admire the view or snap photos of the perfectly arranged floral archway. White petals lined the aisle, a red carpet rolled down the middle, and soft string music floated from the quartet near the back. It was picturesque, romantic, timeless, every detail curated to reflect a love story that was, at least on paper, destined to last forever. Inside the villa, Emily stood still in the hallway, just outside the bridal suite. The baby inside her shifted, and she placed a gentle hand over her belly as if to anchor herself to something. Anything that felt stable. Grace had run off to speak with the event planner, leaving Emily momentarily alone, her thoughts spiraling with the weight of that anonymous text. "Don't trust the woman in red." Tessa. The name rang louder in her mind now, each syllable sharper than it had been just an hour ago when they exchanged what should have been a joyful reunion. Tessa Hart, childhood best friend, maid of mischief, queen of confidence, and, at one point, Emily's entire teenage world. They drifted apart after college, as many friends did, but the closeness had never entirely disappeared. At least, Emily hadn't thought so. Now that memory of Tessa's red dress shimmered in her mind like a flare in the dark. And not in a good way. The door behind her creaked, and she turned quickly to see her mother, Natalie, stepping into the hall. She had a handkerchief in one hand and a look on her face that only mothers seemed capable of carrying, equal parts pride, concern, and hope. "There you are," Natalie said, smiling. "Grace told me you needed a moment." Emily nodded but didn't speak. Natalie studied her daughter for a long second. "You look like you're holding your breath." "I might be," Emily said quietly. Natalie came closer, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "You're allowed to feel nervous. I felt it too, the day I married your father, and I was already pregnant with you." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You were?" Natalie smiled. "Oh yes, you were barely a flutter, but I was terrified. Love makes everything more intense. Joy, fear, all of it. But listen to me, sweetheart. You've made it through so much already. You've built a home in your heart for this child. And Jason, he loves you." That last part felt like a knife being turned slowly in Emily's gut. "I hope he does," she murmured. Natalie's brow furrowed. "Is something wrong?" Before Emily could answer, Grace appeared from around the corner, walking briskly, a tightness in her shoulders that instantly put Emily on edge. "There you are," she said. "I just talked to the coordinator." Jason's still not answering, but Tessa said she saw him about 20 minutes ago. Emily blinked. "Tessa saw him?" "Yeah. Said he was outside by the North Gardens talking to someone." Natalie looked confused. "Why wouldn't he come check in with you?" "That's exactly what I'm wondering," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but something inside her had started to harden. Grace leaned in closer. I don't want to freak you out, but there's something else. One of the photographers said they couldn't get Jason for his solo shots, and the planner mentioned that the last time he was seen, he was heading toward the side entrance. Emily's stomach twisted. With who? That's the thing, Grace said, lowering her voice. The photographer thought he was walking with a woman, said he only caught a glimpse, something about a red dress. Emily stared at her. Tessa's wearing red. They both fell silent. Natalie's voice cut through the moment, steady and calm. Okay, let's not jump to conclusions. We don't know anything for sure. I know enough, Emily whispered. Suddenly, from down the hallway, they heard Tessa's voice calling out. Emily, you okay? Emily turned, watching as Tessa approached, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her smile bright, her curls bouncing perfectly. She stopped a few feet away, holding a champagne flute. You're glowing, Tessa said, raising her glass. I can't believe you're really doing this. You and Jason. Power couple vibes. Grace folded her arms. You said you saw Jason earlier. Tessa nodded. Briefly. He looked a little stressed but happy. I told him he should probably sneak up and kiss the bride before the ceremony, but he said he'd rather not risk a broken tradition. Emily stepped forward slowly. Where exactly did you see him? Tessa hesitated. Near the side garden, I think. He was just pacing. Looked like he needed air. With someone? Grace asked bluntly. Tessa's eyes flickered. Just for a second. Barely perceptible. No, just him, she replied quickly. Too quickly. Natalie gave Emily a look. That mother's look. The one that said, something doesn't feel right. I need to sit, Emily said suddenly. They returned to the bridal suite, and the second Emily sat down, she leaned over, her elbows on her knees, breathing carefully. Grace crouched beside her, holding her hand. We need to find out what's really going on, Grace said quietly. You want me to ask around again? Emily shook her head. No, not yet. If there's a truth to uncover, I want to be the one who sees it. She looked up at the mirror, her reflection staring back. A vision in white, perfect on the outside, unraveling within. I keep thinking I'm just being paranoid, she said softly. But then I remember the way Jason used to be. When we first started dating, he couldn't go 5 hours without texting me. And now, it's like he's somewhere else, even when he's beside me. You think something's going on with him and Tessa? Grace asked carefully. I don't know what I think, Emily replied. I just know that when I hugged her earlier, I felt something cold. Natalie sat down beside her daughter. You don't have to go through with this, honey. Not if you're unsure. No one would blame you. Emily looked at her mother, her eyes softening. I know, but I need to be sure. A knock at the door startled them all. It was the wedding coordinator. 5 minutes until procession, she said cheerily. Is the bride ready? Emily stood slowly, her gown falling around her like water. Tell them I'll be there, she said. Just one thing I need to check first. The coordinator nodded and disappeared. Grace grabbed Emily's arm gently. What are you going to do? I'm going to walk around back, Emily said. If Jason's really just getting air, then I'll see him. And if not, I need to know before I make the biggest mistake of my life. I'm coming with you, Grace said without hesitation. No, Emily said. I need to do this alone. Just give me 5 minutes. If I'm not back, come find me. Natalie started to protest, but Emily shook her head. "Please, Mom. I promise I'm okay." They watched as Emily lifted her train and stepped out of the suite again, disappearing into the corridor that led toward the back of the villa. The hall was quieter now. The music outside played softly, but inside all she could hear was the sound of her own breathing and the soft swish of her dress. Each step felt heavier than the last. She moved quickly but cautiously, her ears tuned to every creak, every rustle. Then, just as she turned a corner, she heard it. A laugh, not loud but unmistakably feminine and familiar. Emily froze, pressing her back against the wall. Another voice followed, low, male, and nervous. "Come on, Tessa. Not now." Her heart stopped. "Tessa? Jason." Emily inched forward until she reached a side door slightly ajar. Through the narrow crack, she could see shadows inside the guest room. "You said you still loved me," Tessa whispered. Jason's voice wavered. I don't know what I said. Everything's a mess." "Is she really who you want?" Tessa asked, almost taunting. "Or are you just marrying her because of the baby?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled slightly, but she held herself upright. "I have to marry her," Jason said after a long silence. "She's the mother of my child. I made a promise." "But you don't love her?" Tessa pressed. "I don't know," he said, sounding like a man unraveling. "I don't know anymore." Emily's hand reached for the doorknob. Her vision blurred. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it echoed down the hall. But she didn't open the door, not yet. Instead, she turned away. Not because she couldn't face them, but because she now knew exactly what needed to be done. The sunlight was beginning to shift, slipping lower in the sky as the golden hour approached, casting long shadows through the tall windows of the estate. Outside, guests laughed beneath the canopy of string lights and blooming cherry blossoms. The wedding was moments away. The air was full of romance. But inside Emily's chest, something sharp had taken root, slicing through the illusion with every passing second. She had returned to the bridal suite quietly, unnoticed. Grace and Natalie were still waiting, their eyes lighting up with relief when she appeared. "Well?" Grace asked, rising from the velvet bench. "Did you see him?" Emily shook her head slowly, her lips slightly parted as though she were still catching her breath. "He's not out there," she whispered. "But I heard them." "Them?" Natalie echoed, her brows pulling together. Emily nodded, her voice a thin thread. "Tessa and Jason, in one of the guest rooms. She asked if he still loved her. He didn't say no." For a moment, no one spoke. Grace's face shifted from worry to fury so quickly, it was like watching a storm pass through her eyes. "What did he say?" Grace asked. Emily stared at her hands, trembling against the lace of her dress. "He said he doesn't know anymore." Natalie stepped closer, taking Emily's hands in hers. "Sweetheart, you don't have to go through with this. No one would think less of you." "I know," Emily said, "but I can't just cancel everything without knowing the full truth." "I thought you just did," Grace said. "No, I need to see it. I need to hear it from him." Just then, a knock at the door interrupted them again. This time it was one of the estate's coordinators. "Apologies," she said, polite but firm. "We're 5 minutes behind schedule. Are we ready for the bride to proceed?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Grace held up a hand. "We need just a few more minutes. Please, hold the procession." The woman nodded and stepped away. Emily stood in the center of the room again, her reflection watching her from the mirror with eyes she barely recognized. Strong, clear, cold. "I want to send him a message," she said suddenly. "Ask him to come up here, just to talk. One last time before I decide anything." Grace grabbed her phone, already typing. "What do you want me to say?" "Just tell him I need 5 minutes, alone, in the suite." Grace sent the message. They waited. A minute passed. Then 2. The screen showed the message had been delivered. Seen, but still no response. Emily's chest grew tighter. She paced slowly across the room, trying to keep her breath steady. Then Grace's phone buzzed. She looked down, her expression stiffening. "He's online, but he's not responding." Natalie's face hardened. "That's it. I'm going to find him." "No," Emily said quickly. "Let me, please." Grace stepped between them. "You shouldn't go alone. What if—" "I'll be fine," Emily insisted. "I know this place. I'll be careful. I need to look him in the eye. If I can't trust what I heard, I can still trust what I see." Grace exchanged a look with Natalie, who reluctantly nodded. 10 minutes, Grace said. "If you're not back, I'm coming to find you." Emily nodded, lifting the hem of her gown slightly and stepping out into the hallway once more. This time her steps were slow but certain. The hallway curved past the guest rooms, each door shut, pristine white with gold handles. The air smelled like orchids and lemon wax polish, too clean, too bright. She stopped in front of the door at the end of the corridor, the one she'd walked past earlier, the one she'd heard voices inside. Her hand hovered near the knob, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she leaned closer. There were voices again, fainter now. Jason's voice, low and conflicted. Tessa's, breathy and flirtatious. Emily could hear the tension in the air like electricity. "You came back to me," Tessa was saying. "You said it yourself. She's not the one you want." There was a pause, then Jason's voice followed, barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Emily turned away. She couldn't listen any longer. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. Down the hall. Around the corner. She returned to the suite breathless, her heart pounding in her throat. "They're still together," she said as she entered, her voice flat. Grace stood up immediately. "Okay, that's it. We're not doing this. We're not walking you down that aisle for a lie." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, honey." But Emily raised a hand. Her face, though pale, was calm. "I'm not walking down the aisle for Jason." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" Emily's jaw tightened. "I'm walking down the aisle to tell the truth." "Emily," Natalie started. But her daughter turned to face the mirror, adjusted the comb in her hair, and looked herself in the eye. "I'm not hiding behind a perfect day that was never meant to be," she said. "They want to play a game in secret? Let's see how brave they are when the curtain falls." Grace stared at her. "You're really going to do this?" Emily nodded. "Yes, I won't scream. I won't cry. But I will speak." Outside, the music began again. The soft instrumental notes of the bridal entrance melody floated through the air. Emily walked to the door. Grace and Natalie flanked her, ready to walk with her if needed. But Emily stopped them both. "No, this is something I have to do alone." "Are you sure?" Grace asked. Emily smiled faintly. "I've never been more sure." She stepped into the hallway, her train trailing behind her like a river of white silk. She descended the steps, every guest rising to their feet. Smiles lit their faces, phones came out. Tears welled in the eyes of strangers who believed they were watching the happiest moment of a woman's life. But Emily wasn't smiling. She reached the edge of the aisle and paused just before stepping onto the red carpet. Someone whispered from the crowd, "Where's the groom?" There was no Jason at the altar, only an empty space surrounded by flowers, lit by the late afternoon sun. Emily stepped forward anyway. She walked down the aisle alone, and every step she took silenced the murmuring, hushed the whispers, quieted the giggles and excitement. People sensed it. The shift in tone, the heaviness in the air. She climbed the steps to the altar, turned, and looked out at the sea of faces. Friends, family, strangers. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, but carried enough weight to hold the world. "I want to thank you all for coming," she began. "Truly, I know many of you traveled far, dressed up, bought gifts, believed in this day as much as I once did." People exchanged confused glances. Natalie clasped her hands together, Grace biting her lip. "But I can't let this ceremony continue," Emily said. "Not without telling you the truth." The guests leaned in, some visibly uncomfortable, others clearly intrigued. "I'm supposed to marry Jason Miller today," she continued. "The man who, until an hour ago, I believed was loyal, kind. The man I believed was going to raise a family with me." She placed her hand on her stomach. "With us." A gasp rippled through the audience. Emily's voice didn't falter. "But Jason isn't here right now. He's not standing at this altar because, moments ago, he was in a guest room with another woman." She turned her head, eyes locked on Tessa, who sat midway down the third row, her face frozen, her hands clutching her clutch bag too tightly. "That woman," Emily said clearly, "is Tessa Hart, my childhood friend, the one wearing red." All eyes turned. Tessa slowly stood, as if rising would shield her somehow. Emily didn't look away. "You said you loved me, Jason. You told me I was your future. You touched my stomach and promised you'd always be there. But when I walked toward you today, you weren't there. You were with her." The crowd was silent now, stunned. Some people already pulling out their phones, others whispering, heads turning between Emily and Tessa like spectators at a tragic play. "I'm not here to beg," Emily said. "I'm not here to fall apart. I'm here to make one thing clear. I may be the woman you betrayed, but I will never be the woman who accepts less than the truth." She turned her eyes back to the crowd. "This ceremony is over, but my life isn't." She stepped down from the altar, alone. The music stopped. No applause, just stunned silence. Until, slowly, one person began clapping. Then another, and another, until the entire garden echoed with the sound of admiration. Not for a wedding, but for a woman brave enough to walk away from one. Emily didn't remember how she got back to the bridal suite. One moment she was descending the steps from the altar to the stunned silence of the crowd, and the next she was standing in front of the mirror again, surrounded by flickering candles and the soft hum of her own shallow breathing. The music outside had stopped. The guests were murmuring in confusion, but inside, everything was still, frozen, like the moment between a storm's lightning and its thunder. Grace was the first to speak. "You did it," she whispered. Her voice wasn't trembling, but her eyes were glassy. "You stood up there, and you told the truth." Emily slowly turned from the mirror, her fingers clenched around the bouquet she'd never thrown. Her voice was barely audible. And yet it still hurts. Natalie moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Of course it does, she said. Telling the truth doesn't erase the betrayal, but it gives it a name, and that's a beginning. Emily sat down, the weight of the gown and the world finally catching up with her. The pressure in her chest made it hard to breathe. She tried to take in air, but each inhale felt shallow, shaky. Her hands went instinctively to her belly. He doesn't deserve to be this baby's father, she said bitterly. No, Grace agreed, kneeling beside her. He doesn't. But you do deserve to be that baby's mother, and right now that means staying strong. Not for the guests, not even for us. For you. Emily looked up, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but before she could, there was a knock at the door. This one was soft. Hesitant. Natalie's expression hardened instantly. If it's him, I swear. Grace moved toward the door, her hand already curled into a fist, but it wasn't Jason standing there. It was a staff member from the estate, young and flustered, holding a tablet. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she said quickly, but there's something you need to see. Grace frowned, stepping forward to look at the screen. Emily saw her friend's face pale as her jaw tightened. What is it? She asked. The girl turned the screen toward Emily. There on security footage was Jason, walking through the rear garden, and beside him, unmistakable in her crimson dress and oversized sunglasses, was Tessa. The timestamp was less than an hour ago, just before the ceremony. They were laughing. Jason touched Tessa's lower back as they approached a black car parked at the side gate. The license plate was covered. Emily didn't need to hear the audio to know what they were saying. The body language said it all. They were comfortable, intimate, and they were sneaking away. As the video ended, Emily stood up so quickly the chair behind her toppled. He left the estate? She asked, her voice rising. The staff girl nodded. Yes, they exited the premises about 40 minutes ago. We don't know where they went. Grace was already grabbing her phone. I'm calling him. Emily reached out and stopped her. No, she said firmly. Don't. But don't you want answers? I already have them, Emily replied, her voice quiet but hard as stone. He walked away, with her. That's all I need to know. There was a long silence in the room. Even the chandelier above seemed to dim with the weight of the truth. I feel like I'm falling apart, Emily finally admitted. Like I've been cut in half and I'm trying to hold the pieces together with thread. Natalie stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Then let us help you hold them. Just for a while. You don't have to be okay today. Emily clung to her mother for a long moment. Then she pulled back, wiped her tears, and said, I need air. Grace reached for her coat. I'll come with you. Emily shook her head. No. Just 5 minutes. I promise. She stepped out of the bridal suite and into the corridor once more. Her gown swished against the marble floor, now stained in places from where her heels had dug in too hard earlier. She moved like a ghost, slipping past the chaos outside. She avoided the guests, the photographers. She didn't care about the looks anymore. She made her way through the side entrance and into the private garden behind the villa. This was the place where she and Jason had sat just days ago, finalizing the last-minute details, where he'd promised her, with a hand on her belly, that no matter what happened, he'd never leave her side. Now, the bench was empty. The breeze picked up slightly, stirring the white petals on the ground. Emily sat down and finally let the silence wrap around her like a blanket, too thin to keep out the cold. Her hands rubbed slow circles on her stomach. Her heart ached. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. No answer came. Not from the wind. Not from the world. Just the sound of approaching footsteps. She looked up sharply and froze. Jason was walking toward her. He looked different. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes, those same eyes that used to promise her forever, were now sunken, heavy with something that looked like guilt, but felt too late to matter. "I saw you," Emily said before he could speak. "On the security footage. You left with her." Jason winced. "Emily, don't," she snapped. "Don't start with Emily, Because I already heard enough through the door. I already saw enough on the screen." He stopped a few feet away, looking like a man who had sprinted 1,000 miles but ended up right where he started. "I messed up," he said. "I know that, but it's not what you think." Emily laughed bitterly. "That's your excuse? After everything? You were going to marry me. You put your hand on my belly and called yourself a father." "I am," he insisted. "I want to be." "Then why did you run away with my best friend?" she demanded. Standing now, towering over him with a fury she never thought she could contain. Jason swallowed. "It wasn't planned. I didn't mean to. Tessa showed up and everything came rushing back." "You're weak," she said flatly, "and I was a fool." "No, you weren't," he whispered. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And yet you still chose her." Jason looked down at his feet. "I didn't choose. I panicked. No," Emily interrupted. "You did choose. You just don't want to admit it. You chose lies over honesty. You chose comfort over courage. And you chose Tessa over the life we were building." Jason stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away like his touch burned. "I'm sorry," he said again. "You can be sorry for the rest of your life," Emily replied. "It won't change what you did." He nodded slowly. "I understand." "No, you don't," she snapped. "Because if you did, you wouldn't have done it in the first place." She turned her back to him, ready to walk away, but he called out, "What about the baby?" She froze. "I want to be in his life," Jason said. "I know I screwed up, but please, don't shut me out completely." Emily didn't turn around. "You don't get to decide that right now, not today." Then she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the garden with nothing but the echoes of everything he'd broken. By the time she returned to the suite, she was numb again. The tears had dried, leaving her hollow. Grace stood when she saw her. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded slowly. "I saw him." Natalie rushed to her side. "What did he say?" "Exactly what I expected. 1,000 excuses and one truth. He chose her." There was silence again, but this time it was different. Not heavy, just quiet, like the calm after something has finally broken. Emily looked at her reflection once more. The gown was still perfect, her hair still flawless, but her eyes, those were different now, no longer wide with hope. Now they burned with clarity, with resolve. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how she'd face the fallout. But she did know one thing. She had already survived the worst day of her life. And she was still standing. The dressing room was quiet again, eerily so. The same room that once buzzed with laughter, hairspray mist, and hopeful anticipation now held its breath, thick with the aftermath of betrayal. Emily sat on the velvet bench. Her wedding dress still pristine, her hair still perfect, but her spirit felt miles away from where it had started that morning. The glow of the chandelier above her felt colder now, like spotlight on a stage where the script had been ripped in half. She no longer felt like a bride. She felt like someone shedding her skin, waking up from a dream that had disguised itself as a fairy tale. Grace hovered nearby, her hands restless, wanting to fix something but not knowing where to begin. She reached for a tissue and silently handed it to Emily, who took it with a small nod, then stared at it without using it. Her eyes were dry now. Whatever storm had passed through her earlier had wrung her out completely. She didn't need to cry anymore. She needed to act. "I'm not done yet," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace looked at her with furrowed brows. "You already said what needed to be said, Em. You don't owe anyone anything." "I owe myself," Emily replied, straightening her spine. "I spoke the truth. But now, I need to make sure no one tries to twist it." Grace opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew that look on Emily's face. It was the same one she wore junior year when she marched into the dean's office and demanded her scholarship be reinstated after an error. The same look she had when her father passed and she stood at the funeral, comforting everyone else. It was the look of someone who had decided that silence was no longer an option. Emily stood slowly, letting the fabric of her gown fall into place around her feet. "I need to go back out there. One more time." "Are you sure?" Grace asked carefully. "You already walked down that aisle once today. You don't have to walk it again just to prove something." "I'm not proving anything," Emily said. "I'm finishing what I started." Natalie appeared in the doorway, her face a mix of concern and admiration. "If you want, I can tell the guests to leave. Say the ceremony's been canceled officially. Thank them for coming." Emily shook her head. "No, I'll speak to them myself." Her mother hesitated, then stepped forward and kissed her forehead. "You're stronger than I ever was." "I learned it from you," Emily replied softly. She took a deep breath and walked to the mirror once more. She didn't fix her hair, didn't touch up her makeup. She didn't need to look flawless. She needed to look real. And she did. A woman in a wedding gown who had been cheated on by the man she loved. A woman carrying a child, standing taller than any man who had tried to make her feel small. A woman with nothing left to hide. Outside, the guests were still milling around, unsure of what to do. The music had stopped again, replaced by low murmurs and speculative chatter. The servers stood awkwardly near the bar. The wedding coordinator looked helpless, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. When the doors opened, every head turned. Emily walked out alone. Again. But this time, her presence wasn't just powerful, it was commanding. No orchestra announced her, no flower girl paved her path, but somehow, every footstep echoed louder than any music could. The guests, sensing something monumental, fell into silence once more. Emily climbed the small set of stairs to the altar where she had once imagined exchanging vows with Jason. She looked out over the sea of stunned faces, some concerned, some embarrassed, some awkwardly avoiding eye contact. And she didn't flinch. "I know you've heard enough today," she began. and I know many of you are wondering whether to stay or go. I understand. But before you leave, I want to say one final thing. Not as a bride, not as a victim, but as a woman who refuses to disappear quietly. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the birds in the garden seemed to still. I grew up believing in love, believing that when someone looks at you and says, "You're the one," they mean it. I believed in loyalty, in forever. I believed in Jason. She paused, letting his name hang in the air. I believed that love, once given, was sacred, but what I learned today is that sometimes people say the right things with the wrong intentions. Sometimes they say forever because it's easier than saying goodbye. Sometimes they look you in the eyes and promise the world, while handing the same promises to someone else behind your back. There were gasps now. Guests were exchanging looks, shifting in their seats. Some already knew. Some were hearing this for the first time, and one woman in red, seated near the back, was now trying to discreetly rise from her seat. Emily's eyes found her instantly. "Tessa," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "You can stand, or you can sit, but don't pretend you weren't a part of this." Tessa froze. Her cheeks burned crimson. She sat back down. "You were supposed to be my friend, my sister. And yet, while I was planning the rest of my life, you were plotting how to take it apart piece by piece. You didn't just betray me. You watched me walk toward a future you already knew was a lie." A murmur rippled through the crowd, disapproval now evident. The tide was turning. "I don't need your apologies," Emily said, eyes still on Tessa. "I don't even need your explanation. What I need, what I am taking back, is my narrative, my dignity, my voice." She turned back to the rest of the guests. "This wedding may be over, but my life isn't, and neither is this child's," she said, resting her hand over her belly. "He'll grow up knowing that his mother didn't lower her head in shame when someone tried to steal her joy. He'll know that she stood and spoke and walked away not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to say no to a life built on lies." People were standing now, clapping, slowly at first, but then louder, some with tears in their eyes, some nodding, arms crossed in solemn solidarity. Emily stepped down from the altar, her head high, her steps steady. Grace and Natalie stood waiting, their eyes red, their arms open. "You did it," Grace whispered, embracing her. "Was I too harsh?" Emily asked, almost unsure. Natalie pulled her close. "No, you were honest, and that's always enough." The guests began to disperse, many offering quiet words of support as they passed. Some even hugging Emily, though she hardly knew them. The coordinator approached timidly. "Ms. Carter, I just wanted to say that was the most powerful thing I've ever witnessed." "Thank you," Emily said softly. "But I'm no hero, just a woman who finally stopped waiting for someone else to save her." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Guests left, decorations came down, the cake, untouched, was boxed away. The floral arch was disassembled petal by petal. What was meant to be a day of celebration had become something else entirely, a reckoning. And through it all, Emily stood at the edge of it, watching the dream collapse in slow motion and realizing she didn't need to grieve it anymore. Later that evening, when the estate was nearly empty, she stood in the garden one last time. The fairy lights above her flickered on automatically as the sun sank behind the hills. The chair rows were now bare, the red carpet rolled up, but she stood in the exact spot where she had once imagined saying, "I do." She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "I did it." Behind her, Grace and Natalie watched silently, letting her have the moment. When Emily turned to face them, she said, "Let's go home." And together they walked away, not from a wedding, but from the ashes of a lie, into a future none of them had planned, but all of them had chosen. And that, Emily thought, was its own kind of happy ending. Emily sat by the window in her childhood bedroom, the soft peach walls and fading floral curtains wrapping her in the kind of familiarity that made the worst days feel survivable. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting streaks of gold and purple across the sky. From the garden, she could hear the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional murmur of her mother speaking to a neighbor over the fence. The chaos of the wedding day had passed, but its echo hadn't left her yet. It lingered in every breath, every quiet room she walked into, every beat of silence between conversations. She held a warm mug of chamomile tea between her palms, more for comfort than for drinking. Her hand still trembled now and then, not with fear, but with the overwhelming weight of knowing that everything she thought was real had unraveled in front of hundreds of witnesses. And yet, she hadn't collapsed. She hadn't run. She'd stood at that altar, told the truth, and walked away. It hadn't felt like triumph in the moment, but in the quiet hours that followed, something inside her had started to shift. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Grace. "Just letting you know," Tessa's already trying to play the victim, posted some long sob story online about how Jason was trapped in a toxic relationship and you were emotionally manipulative. Emily exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing. The audacity wasn't surprising. Tessa had always known how to twist the truth until it wrapped around her like a silk scarf. But this was different. This wasn't high school gossip or college drama. This was a woman trying to rewrite history, to erase betrayal by painting herself in soft, sympathetic tones. She picked up her phone and opened her social media app. The post was right there on Tessa's feed, barely a few hours old but already gathering sympathy from people who had no idea what had really happened. "Love is never wrong," it began. "Sometimes it finds us at the wrong time, in the wrong place. But does that make it any less real?" There were pictures, too. One of Jason in a black and white filter, looking lost and brooding. Another of Tessa in that same red dress, cropped so no one could see the venue behind her. She had written the caption like a poem, implying that Emily had used her pregnancy to trap Jason, that she had become cold and distant, that Jason had simply fallen out of love. Emily stared at the screen, her heart pounding, not from hurt, but from anger. "This isn't going to be how the world remembers this," she whispered to herself. "Not if I can help it." She stood, walked to her desk and pulled out her laptop. She sat down, fingers hovering above the keyboard for a moment, then began to type. Not with rage, not with desperation, but with clarity, with truth. She wrote about the day she met Jason, how he'd brought her coffee every morning for 2 weeks before asking her out, how he'd held her hand when she found out she was pregnant, how they'd picked baby names while lying on the couch, his hand on her belly, promising that he'd always be there. Then she wrote about the small things, how he'd started coming home later, how he never looked her in the eye when she talked about the nursery, how Tessa had started showing up again out of nowhere after years of silence. She described the moment she heard them in that guest room, the exact words. the betrayal so fresh it still had a pulse. And she ended it with a line she hadn't planned but somehow felt inevitable. I didn't walk away from the wedding because I was broken. I walked away because I refused to build a future on lies. And if that makes me the villain in someone else's fantasy, so be it. I choose truth. I choose my child. I choose myself. She hit post. Within minutes, the notifications began. Hearts, comments, shares. Strangers, people she didn't even know, were leaving words of support, flooding her inbox with empathy. Other women shared their own stories. Some said they'd cried reading it. Some called her brave. Some called her a hero. It wasn't about the attention. It was about reclaiming the narrative. She scrolled through the comments until she found one that made her stop. Tessa just deleted her post. Emily allowed herself the smallest smile, not from spite, but from a sense of balance returning. The next morning, her mother brought her breakfast in bed, scrambled eggs and toast with strawberry jam, the same way she'd made it when Emily was 10 and had the flu. "I saw what you wrote," Natalie said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm proud of you, not just for walking away, but for speaking when it mattered." Emily looked down at her plate. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, that Jason's still out there setting up the chairs, that Tessa's still my friend." Natalie reached out, placing her hand over Emily's. "Sweetheart, the hardest part of being strong is realizing that not everyone will be grateful when you stop pretending." Emily nodded slowly. "He hasn't called, not once, and knows he has nothing to say that you'd want to hear." Emily wasn't so sure about that. She suspected he would call eventually, or show up. Jason never did well with silence. He hated not being able to explain himself, to rationalize. He needed closure. But Emily had already closed the door. Later that afternoon, while she was folding baby clothes in the living room, her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I just wanted to feel loved, even if just once. But I was wrong. So wrong." She knew who it was. The lack of a name made it obvious. It was Tessa. Hiding behind vague language, hoping not to be held accountable, Emily stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. No response. Some people didn't deserve closure. That night, she sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the stars spread above her like a quiet reminder that life went on. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered, "We're okay." Inside, the news had already started circulating. Jason's family company was facing backlash. The board had reportedly pressured him to step down after the scandal went public, and Tessa's influencer deals had started to fall apart. Brands quietly removing her from upcoming campaigns, citing integrity concerns. It wasn't vengeance. It was consequence. Emily didn't feel triumphant. She didn't want to see anyone suffer. But she believed in accountability. And finally, for once, the world seemed to agree. Grace came over the next morning, holding a folder full of printed comments and messages from the post. "You're not going to believe how many women are sharing this," she said, placing them on the table. "I thought you might want to keep them." Emily flipped through the pages. Some were handwritten letters printed from emails. Others were typed posts with yellow highlights. All of them said the same thing. "Thank you for standing up, for telling the truth, for walking away when it mattered most." "I never thought I'd be the face of anything," Emily admitted, flipping to the next page. "You're not trying to be," Grace said. "That's what makes it real." Her mother entered with a tray of lemon water. "And that's what makes it powerful." Emily placed her hand on her belly again, feeling a small flutter beneath her fingers. She smiled. The world had changed around her, fallen apart and rearranged itself in just a few days. But through it all, she was still standing, still growing, still choosing herself. This wasn't the life she'd imagined. But maybe, just maybe, it was the life she needed. The morning sun poured through the windows of Carmen's third-floor apartment, casting long golden beams across the hardwood floor. Emily stood by the kitchen counter, cradling a cup of warm lemon water in her hands. The scent was calming, bright and clean. It reminded her of beginnings, of clarity. She wasn't wearing her wedding dress anymore. That had been carefully packed away the day before, not to be preserved as a memory, but to be donated, cleansed of its meaning and repurposed for someone else's future. Across the table, Carmen sat with a stack of printed pages. She flipped through them slowly, reading messages from strangers who had found Emily's post online and had been moved enough to write. Their words were printed in different fonts, some bold, some italicized, some written with all caps like someone had screamed them from their keyboard. But the messages carried the same heartbeat: gratitude, admiration, solidarity. Grace, curled up on the armchair in a hoodie and leggings, tossed a pen into the air and caught it again. "Your post is still going viral," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Another 10,000 likes overnight. You're trending. People are writing about you in blogs, calling you the woman who exposed betrayal in a wedding dress." Emily gave a soft laugh, more air than sound. "I never wanted to be famous." "You're not famous," Carmen said gently. "You're honest. People are starving for honesty." "And strength," Grace added. "Because what you did, that takes guts most people only dream of having." Emily walked over to the table and picked up one of the letters. It was from a woman in Georgia who'd canceled her wedding 2 weeks before the big day after discovering her fiancé had been unfaithful. She'd read Emily's story, and it gave her the strength to stop feeling ashamed. She wrote, "Your story made me feel less alone," Emily murmured. "You've started something," Carmen said. "Something good." Emily sat down, placing a protective hand on her belly. The baby stirred gently, a reminder that life was still unfolding within her, growing in quiet strength. There was a knock at the door. All three women tensed slightly. Carmen stood to answer it, peeking through the peephole before pulling the door open. Lucy rushed in, breathless and visibly flustered. She carried a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder and a phone in her hand, which she held up as she walked in. "It's started," she said. Emily frowned. "What started?" "Jason," Lucy said. "He just posted." Emily's stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the familiar sting of anticipation. She hadn't seen or heard from Jason since the wedding day. He hadn't texted, hadn't called. He'd vanished like a coward, too ashamed to face the truth. Now, apparently, he'd found his voice. Lucy handed over her phone, and Emily scrolled through the post. It was a long message, written in a tone that tried to sound humble but felt rehearsed, like a man trying to salvage what little reputation he had left. "I made a mistake," it began. "I betrayed someone I cared about deeply, and for that, I'll always be sorry. The events that unfolded weren't how I planned anything. I let myself get overwhelmed. I let fear and confusion cloud my judgment. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. He didn't mention Emily by name. Didn't mention Tessa either. But it was clear who he was referring to. The comments were already flooding in. Some forgiving, others furious. Some people called him brave for apologizing. Others demanded he disappear. Emily handed the phone back and leaned into her chair. "He still can't say my name." "Helm doesn't get to frame this as confusion," Grace snapped. "He made a choice." "I know," Emily said softly. "And the people who matter, they know too." Lucy sat beside her. "So, what now? Are you going to respond?" Emily shook her head. "No. Silence says everything. And anyway, I'm done letting him take up space in my story." There was a long pause, a quiet shift in the air as the weight of those words settled into the room. Carmen placed a fresh cup of tea in front of her, and Emily accepted it with a nod of thanks. Later that afternoon, the three women packed into Carmen's car and drove back to the estate. Not for a wedding, not for closure, just to collect what belonged to Emily. Her documents, her grandmother's pearl bracelet, a small wooden box that once held handwritten letters from Jason, back when everything had felt unbreakable. The villa was quieter now. The flower arrangements had been taken down, the altar dismantled. The chairs had been stacked and the red carpet rolled up. It looked like the ghost of an event that never fully came to life. The event manager greeted them at the gate with an apologetic expression. "I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry for everything. What you did was incredibly brave." Emily smiled politely. "Thank you. I'm just here to pick up a few things." They made their way through the estate. Emily paused once, near the garden path where she had confronted Jason with her eyes instead of words. She didn't linger, didn't let her mind drift back. She just walked on, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other holding the hem of her sweater. Inside the bridal suite, the air still smelled faintly of roses and perfume, but the energy had shifted. It no longer belonged to a bride-to-be. It was just a room now, just a space. Emily opened the wooden box and stared down at the neatly folded letters Jason had once written her, inked with promises. Words that had once made her feel safe. She didn't cry. She closed the box and handed it to Carmen. "Burn them." "You sure?" Carmen asked gently. "Yes," Emily said. "I don't keep things that don't carry truth." Carmen nodded, and within moments the fireplace crackled to life. The letters curled and blackened, smoke rising like a quiet ritual of release. Emily watched every flame, every ash, until there was nothing left but warmth. That evening, back at the apartment, her phone rang. An unknown number. Emily hesitated, then answered. "This is she." Jason's voice came through, low and unsure. "Emily, it's me." She closed her eyes for a moment. "What do you want?" "I know I have no right. I wanted to see you, one last time, just to say something in person." There was a long pause. Emily finally replied, "Tomorrow, Corner Cafe on Villa Street, 2 p.m., 10 minutes, no more." "Thank you," Jason whispered. The next day she arrived precisely on time. The cafe was quiet, the patio shaded by white umbrellas and the gentle buzz of soft conversation. Jason was already seated, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He looked tired, worn, a shadow of the man she once knew. "You're here," he said, standing. "No need for pleasantries," Emily replied, sitting down. "Say what you came to say." Jason pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. A sonogram photo. their baby, tiny, perfect. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice trembling. "Not because I lost everything, but because I never deserved everything you gave me." Emily didn't speak. "I hurt the only woman who ever loved me without conditions. I know I can't ask for forgiveness. Please don't hate me." She looked at the photo, then at him. "I don't hate you," she said. "I just don't feel enough to hate you." He swallowed hard. "Have you picked a name?" She nodded. "If it's a girl, Alexandra, because it's the stronger version of your name." "Alejandro." Jason bowed his head. "I hope she grows up nothing like me." Emily stood. "I hope she grows up knowing exactly what she's worth." And then she walked away. She didn't look back. She never would. Because the next chapter had already begun. And this time, it belonged entirely to her. Emily stood in the center of her new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the scent of fresh paint. The soft pastel mauve walls of the nursery glowed in the late afternoon light. It wasn't big, just a cozy one-bedroom space with creaky floors and windows that rattled when the wind blew. But it was hers. It was real. No illusion of perfection, no borrowed promises, no ghosts of a failed wedding whispering from the corner. This was the beginning of something built by her own hands, brick by emotional brick, a space where she could breathe. She moved slowly, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other clutching a small screwdriver. She had spent the afternoon assembling a white crib, carefully fitting each slat together. Grace had offered to help, but Emily had said no. She needed to do this herself. Each screw she tightened, each piece of wood she polished, was her quiet rebellion against the pain that had tried to claim her. With every twist of her wrist, she said, "I'm still here. I'm still standing." From the kitchen, the kettle whistled, snapping her out of her thoughts. She padded over, poured hot water over a chamomile tea bag, and brought the mug to the windowsill, where she could watch the city move. Cars passed below. Children laughed somewhere nearby. The world hadn't stopped when her life collapsed. It never did. And somehow, knowing that made her feel less alone. The knock sounded at the door. She walked over and opened it to find Lucy standing there with a grocery bag, her hair tied in a messy ponytail and her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Delivery from your unofficial little sister," Lucy grinned. "Snacks, prenatal vitamins, and ice cream, because healing requires sugar." Emily smiled, stepping aside to let her in. "You didn't have to." "I know," Lucy said, kicking off her shoes. "But you're you, and you deserve a fridge full of comfort food." They set the groceries on the counter. Lucy looked around the apartment, her eyes wide with admiration. "This place is peaceful." "It's mine," Emily said softly. "That's what makes it peaceful." They sat down on the couch, an old hand-me-down from Carmen, covered with a navy throw blanket. Emily tucked her legs under herself and sipped her tea. Lucy pulled out a manila folder and handed it over. "What's this?" Emily asked. "I printed more messages from people who read your story. There's one from a woman in Toronto who walked away from a 15-year marriage after reading your post. Another from a teenager who said your words gave her the courage to confront her mom's abusive boyfriend." Emily opened the folder, flipping through the letters. Each one was like a light in the dark, a reminder that pain didn't have to be a solitary experience, that truth, once spoken aloud, had the power to ripple outward and crack open doors for other people. I didn't mean to start anything," Emily said. "I know," Lucy replied. But that's the thing. You didn't try to be brave. You just were. And people saw that. Emily looked at her. Do you ever feel like, even though things are getting better, there's still a part of you stuck back there? At the wedding? Lucy didn't answer right away. She reached over and took Emily's hand. I think when something shatters like that, there are always pieces that stay with you. Not because you want them to, but because they remind you of what you survived. Emily nodded slowly. Sometimes I still hear the music, the murmurs, the silence after I said it was over. Sometimes I wake up and wonder if any of it actually happened. It did, Lucy said, and the fact that you still wake up, that's proof that you're moving forward. That night, after Lucy left, Emily stood by the nursery doorway. The crib was finished, sitting beneath the window like a quiet promise. She walked in, placed a hand on the railing, and closed her eyes. The baby kicked gently, a small flutter. "Hey there," she whispered. "It's just us now, but I think that's more than enough." The next few days passed in a rhythm Emily had never known before. Peaceful, intentional, quiet. She worked remotely with a small interior design firm, taking on a project for a client renovating a historic brownstone. Her first assignment was titled The Truth. It felt symbolic. She poured herself into the sketches, the mood boards, the color palettes. She chose earth tones, honest textures, and soft light. She designed it like she was building a life, not just a living room. Every morning, Carmen texted her a quote of the day. Some were funny, others profound, but all of them reminded Emily that strength didn't have to be loud. It could be steady, consistent, patient. Then, one evening, as she was folding laundry, her phone buzzed. A news article had been published. Wedding Walkout, the viral story of a woman who exposed betrayal in a white dress. Emily clicked the link. The article was long, well-written, and surprisingly respectful. It told her story with compassion and care, highlighting her decision to speak out at the altar, the social media post that followed, and the wave of support it sparked. It didn't glamorize the betrayal. It didn't shame the choice to leave. It simply told the truth. At the bottom of the article, there was a quote from one of her posts. "I didn't cancel the wedding because I was angry. I canceled it because I deserved more." Emily put the phone down, her heart beating slower than she expected. She didn't feel exposed. She felt seen. Later that week, she returned to the estate one final time. Not to relive anything, just to collect a small envelope that had been accidentally left behind. Carmen drove her, staying quiet most of the ride, letting Emily stare out the window, lost in thought. The villa was empty, the gardens trimmed, the walkways swept clean, the altar long gone, the dressing room now locked and dark. Emily stood outside for a moment, just breathing. Then she whispered, "Goodbye." Not to the place, but to the woman she had been when she'd walked in. She didn't look back. On the ride home, she said, "I'm ready." "For what?" Carmen asked. "For whatever comes next." 2 weeks later, Emily moved into her new routine. Prenatal checkups, morning walks, designing her first solo interior project. Lucy visited every Sunday with banana bread. Carmen came over once a week with a new parenting book. And every day, Emily wrote a letter to her baby. Not long, just a paragraph or two. Some were about hope, some were about fear. Others were just silly notes about cravings or what music they'd listened to that morning. She stored them all in a small wooden box. A new one, not the one Jason had filled with empty promises, but one she had bought herself. One she would give to her child someday. "I want you to know," she wrote one afternoon, "that your mother wasn't perfect. But she tried. She fought. She chose love. Not the kind that asks you to stay quiet, but the kind that demands you speak." When the baby kicked, she smiled. She had chosen herself. And in doing so, she had chosen a better world for her child, too. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Emily's story. If you're still here, it means her journey touched something deep within you. And for that, we're truly grateful. This isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's about courage. It's about choosing truth over illusion, dignity over deception, and self-respect over silent suffering. Emily taught us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not in weakness, but in strength. Life doesn't always follow the script we imagine, but it's in those unscripted moments that we find out who we really are. If you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or made to feel small, let this be your reminder. You are worthy of real love, and you have the power to rewrite your own story. Before you go, let us know. Where are you watching from? We love hearing from viewers all over the world, and if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, heartfelt stories like this one. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and never settle for less than you deserve.